Alright, we're going to change sides of the family here. We're now going to make what's called meat pies. And we're going to make the dough first. What meat pies are is you make a dough that's usually like a pie dough. We refrigerate it overnight. The next day we're going to make up a mixture of hamburger, potatoes, carrots, onion, add some salt and pepper, add an egg, mix it together. We're going to roll out the dough. We're going to cut it into squares. We're going to fill the squares. We're going to fold the squares over, flip it over, put a slit in it, put a piece of butter in it, 350 oven for an hour. The recipe for the dough is sift together 2 cups of flour and 1 teaspoon of salt, which is what we've already done. We need to cut in 2/3 of a cup of shortening. Now, you're saying, how do you get 2/3 of a cup of shortening? This is a trick that Kristen showed me. What you do is you take a 2-cup measurer, and I've got it measured out to 1 1/3 cup. So what I want to do is I want to add enough Crisco to bring up to 2 cups. And that'll be my 2/3 of a cup of shortening. Pretty clever, ain't it? One of the stories about meat pies, and they're called different things from different parts of the country, is meat pies were what the women used to make out of what was left over from last night's dinner to send along with their men as they went off to work, usually in the mines or somewhere else where the men couldn't get something to eat during the course of the day. Okay, we got 2/3 of a cup of Crisco. And what they would normally do is, let's say they had stew for dinner the night before with the meat and potatoes, they would just go ahead and make a pie dough, put this in a pie dough, put the leftover stew in a pie dough, and then bake it off and send their husbands to work the next day with meat pies. So they'd have their meat and potatoes at work. We went up to Mackinac Island, and one of the restaurants at Mackinac Island had something that was called, it was not called meat pies, but they were essentially the same thing. And all my uncles tried it and they just loved it. Okay, 2/3 of a cup of shortening in there, so I'm using my pastry cutter. And I just want to break this up. This is not like making a pizza dough or a tortilla dough. This requires a different touch. And what we're looking for is we're looking for this stuff to turn into coarse cornmeal. I put in a cup of water into the freezer in order for it to get cold, because what we need to do is we need to add 5 to 6 tablespoons of cold water and keep tossing it until it's moist enough to hold together. Alright, so the water has been in the freezer for about 20 minutes. Okay, we're almost getting there. Can you see how the texture has changed on this? This is something my grandmother Webster used to make, my mother's mother. And man, they were always so good. The best time to get them was fresh out of the oven. And I'll tell you another story about the meat pies that relates to my family. My dad, who's a Mexican, married my mother, who's an Irish-English woman. And when my dad went over and had the meat pies for the first time, he asked for ketchup. And all my uncles are going, what? So my dad put ketchup all over his meat pies, and you know what? That's the way everybody eats them now. They got to put ketchup on their meat pies. You got the flour and the Crisco mixed up so it looks like coarse cornmeal. See it? Now we want to add about 5 to 6 tablespoons of cold water, and we want to toss it as we're adding it. And what we're looking for it to just start to hold together. We don't want too much water. We don't want too little. This is a tough job to do alone, but here we go. 1, 2. Let me switch. See, it's not really a full tablespoon. 6. Alright, and again, this is a dough that you can use for pies or cobblers as well. And now it's starting to hold together. See how it's holding together now? Okay, I think that's all we're going to do to this. It looks like it's holding together. It looks like it's pretty wet. I wound up adding about 8 tablespoons of water, not the 5 or 6 that the recipe calls for. But that just shows you how we're willing to take some chances here in the kitchen. Scrape my fork off. I don't want to mix this, I just want to ball it. I'm just trying to gather it up here. And we're just going to make this into a ball. And since we're going to be, I'm not going to knead this. My hands almost started to knead it. I just want to ball it. We're going to be rolling this out tomorrow into squares. So I want to get this dough so it's looking a little bit boxy. I don't want it round. Burn it out. Okay, now what I'm going to do is put in some wax paper and refrigerate it overnight. And this is a Webster family deal. And it's also part of my heritage. My mother's an Irish woman. Okay, we're ready for the refrigerator. Got my dough made. We're going to finish making up the meat pies this morning. What I've got in the bowl so far is 1 carrot that's been diced. You can see the carrot. 1/4 of an onion that's been diced. Kristen went out and picked some potatoes from the garden for me this morning. These are Yukon Gold potatoes. They're small ones, and I've just diced them up. I try to dice them about the same size as everything else. What we're going to add now is 1 pound of Hamburger, and we're going to add some salt and pepper, and an egg to bind it. One other thing I have in here is I have some frozen peas. They're not homegrown peas. Again, Kristen found out that at the co-op, you can just go buy peas in bulk. So that's what I did. I went and bought some peas, probably about 1/2 cup. Okay, so I got my Hamburger in there. I'm now going to put some salt, just a little bit. I don't use a lot of salt in my cooking. Add some ground black pepper. I use fresh ground black pepper, so it's a little bit on the tastier side. Okay, now I'm going to add 1 egg. The egg is to bind it. And now I get to put my hands in it and just mix it all together. Doesn't that look like fun? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish mixing this up. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. And then I'm going to start rolling out some of the dough. I've already got the oven heating up to 350, and once I get these done, they'll bake for an hour. I'm ready to roll out the dough. This is the dough I made yesterday. It's been refrigerating all night. After making these things 3 or 4 times, I found that it's a little bit easier to use this dough if it's been brought to room temperature just a little bit. I mean, wow, room temperature. I found that it's really hard to roll cold. Okay, I got my cutting board out, my nice big cutting board that Kristen bought for us years ago. And we need some flour on the cutting board that we're going to spread around. Let's take out now the dough is like this, but I'm going to cut off an end of it. And get it on the cutting board. And I want to try to get it into a square if I can, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this out, and hopefully it will roll out for me so I can get at least 2, if not 4, meat pies out of this one. And you just keep rolling it and shaping it. And you notice I am flipping it so I can see what's going on the other side. And turning it. And you can feel the edges if one side is getting too thick than the other. You can feel it, because like this side is a little bit thicker than the other side. So we're just going to roll it out here. Gathering up some more flour for the bottom side. You see what's happening? I'm losing a little bit of the shape here. So we need to get this squared up a little bit here. Yeah, this side over here is the side that didn't have as much dough as this side, so you can see that I'm getting a little bit of problem here, but that looks okay. Okay. This looks big enough for a couple meat pies. That's basically what we rolled it out for 2 meat pies. They're going to be big meat pies, no question. So I just take my knife and I cut it down the middle, and you can see I've got more of a rectangle than a square. Or what you can do if you want is you can cut off the edges out here if you want, just to make it look pretty. This is my mixture of the meat that's been mixed with the carrots and all that. So we're going to take a big handful of it, a big glob. And depending on the size of the dough you roll, it depends on how big you can make the meat pie. So these look pretty good size, so I can put a pretty big glob. That's probably a little bit bigger than a baseball. It's pretty good size. It may be too big, but that's okay. It's for a big guy. And again, it depends on how big you roll out the dough. So let's do another one here. But boy, don't that look good. Okay? Now what you do is you just fold them up. So we'll take this corner and bring it up. 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 And now you kind of mush it down. See how it's mushing down? I mushed it down. And then you kind of clean it up. You fold up the edges. And just kind of pack it down and pack it in there. Okay? Now I've got a little bit of meat showing here, but that's alright. I mean, the meat and the filling is coming through, but that's, I roll that side a little bit too thin, but we're okay. And now we flip it over and we bake it with the seam side down. Okay? 8 pretty good sized meat pies. You can see these are quite large. I mean, one of these is probably a lunch for somebody. When I first started making these, I was making them a lot smaller. But now we're going to do the final step. And the final step is you put a little slit in the top to let the steam come through. And what I learned from my mother is that she likes to put a little bit of butter inside of these. I guess you could use margarine or any kind of oil. And the reason for that is she wanted to add some moisture to these. They tend to, and she just sticks a little piece of butter inside the hole there. These now go into a 350 oven for 1 hour. When they're done baking, I'll show them to you and I'll cut one open for you. And I'll throw ketchup all over it. And you can hear that's my timer. And here they come out of the oven. There they are. One of the things I like to do when they come out of the oven is make sure they're movable off the bottom. This is the one I'm going to eat. Sometimes if I don't get them now, I have a hard time getting them on there. But don't they look good? Look at those babies. These freeze well. They don't reheat well in the microwave. That makes the dough a little tough. But if you let them thaw and put them in a toaster oven, they're really good. Okay, let's cut into it and see what we got here. Oh boy. Crust is nice and flaky. Oh boy. Looks cooked through. And there's a meat pie. Now I'm going to smother it with ketchup and just go have lunch. And that's it for meat pies.